Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable. The official welcome today will come from Jen Wagner-Lahr. Jen is the AURI Senior Director of Commercialization. In that role, she oversees projects in partnership with AURI staff, commodity groups, state and federal agencies, and other collaborators and stakeholders that fulfill the AURI mission. She truly has boots on the ground, as Jen and her husband run a diversified crop and livestock farm in central Minnesota and raise three wonderful children. Please welcome Jen Wagner-Lahr.
All right, well, thank you, Dan. Okay, good morning and welcome to the 2021 Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable. First, let me say how much we appreciate everyone's ability to pivot quickly to make this meeting today virtual. We certainly had hoped to see everyone at the Midwest Technology Campus in Willmar today, but as things have often changed in the last 2 years, we had to pivot and make some new plans. So a note to those that are near Willmar or planning to participate in the tour today that is still on. Michael Sparby from our team will be at the Bushmills ethanol plant in Atwater at 1:30. So please go directly to the plant if you intend to participate in that tour. Bushmills Ethanol is also one of our sponsors today. And I want to thank them as well as our other sponsors, Christensen and Associates and Chippewa Valley Ethanol Company. Thank you for making this event possible today. AURI has been presenting the Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable since 2006. The Minnesota legislature created AURI over 30 years ago and tasked the organization with fostering long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. 15 years ago, they added a state statute directing AURI to conduct the Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable each year. This statute also directs AURI to further the state's leadership on bioenergy issues and engage professionals and experts from the private sector, government agencies, academic institutions, and nonprofit entities across the state to identify opportunities and collaborate with a broad group of interested parties across the state to identify future alternative courses of action the state can take to sustain a long-term competitive position in renewable energy. Our team has put together a robust program today, and I think you will find it informational, educational, and will give you some new insights into the work that is being done to fuel our future. And toward the end of the day, we look forward to hearing from you and what you are taking away from today's event. Again, thank you all for participating in today's Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable. Have a terrific day, and let's go back to Dan for a few announcements and an introduction of our first presenter.
Thanks, Jen. AURI values our relationship that we have with policymakers and state agencies, both in Minnesota and in Washington, D.C. So we would like to acknowledge some of those who are joining us today, including Rachel Dame, Agriculture Policy Advisor for Governor Tim Walz, Representative Samantha Vang, Vice Chair of the Minnesota House Ag Committee, Representative Rob Eklund, a member of the Minnesota House Ag Committee, Representative Dave Baker. We had planned to be in his district today, as Willmar is located in District 17B of the Minnesota House of Representatives. Also with us today, Paula Sunday and Peter Engel with Senator Tina Smith's office, Robert Benson, a regional representative for Congressman Tom Emmer, several staff from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, including Assistant Commissioner Patrice Bailey, and Andrew Jamalowitz with USDA Rural Development. We're glad that you're all here today. Now, as Jen mentioned, AURI's Renewable Energy Roundtable is guided by state statutes set forth by the Minnesota legislature. Statutorily, we are also required to include external team leaders. And in 2021, those included Rose Pratzer from the Minnesota State University System, Bob Patton from Minnesota Department of Agriculture, Michael Reese from the University of Minnesota, and Adi Renate from the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Today, we plan to spend time learning from industry and scientific experts in biofuels, biorefinery, carbon management, and bioenergy. We will get a glimpse of what's being worked on and why, and how biofuels will play into the fuels of the future. And if they have not been a disruptor in the fuel system yet, How soon before they are? And is it sustainable? We are even dedicating 15 minutes toward the end of the day to hear from you. We want to know what you heard, what you learned, and what left you wondering. It should be a productive day. We know the question is going to come up, so yes, we will be sending you an email with a link so that you can access information that's presented today. And if you have questions during any part of our program today, you'll be able to ask them through the chat portal on your screen. Later in the day, we'll even try and let people verbally ask their questions as we have a little bit of a discussion time. We do have a busy day ahead, and as we think about fueling the future and what that looks like and who's working now to lay the groundwork and what are they discovering, our first presenter today will be Dr. John Hannan. He's Chief Operating Officer of Vertimass LLC. He started his career in oil exploration with Schlumberger and then migrated into sustainable fuel and chemical spaces, focusing on green jet fuel and chemicals, and the sustainable food spaces, focusing on agricultural and cellular chemicals and proteins and fats. His expertise is in process economics, in scale-up, technical due diligence, life cycle analysis, and identifying critical technical areas for cost improvements. So please welcome Dr. Hannan.
Yeah, much Stan and Jen for the introduction. John Hannan, Chief Operating Officer of Vertimass, and yeah, very pleased to introduce to you our technology: low cost, low carbon, sustainable fuels now. So, yep. I don't know if you're working the slides, but next slide, please. Okay, good, cool. Okay, so a little bit on the history, the left side of the slide there. So we were looking around for technologies that could make a major impact to sustainable aviation or sustainable aviation fuels in general. And we found a technology from Oak Ridge National Laboratory back in 2014 that did things that we'd never seen before. So it alcohol to jets, alcohol to hydrocarbon technology has been around for about 40 years, but we never seen it cost effective. And we saw this technology from Oak Ridge National Labs, and it was cost effective. And so we licensed the technology back in 2014. And yeah, we've been advancing it since then. As you see in the bottom left, technology converts ethanol and actually other alcohols as well into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel blend stocks, LPG, and building block chemicals. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. Our mission, Vertimass, top right, is to expand the use of sustainable aviation fuels and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve energy and security in domestic economies. That's our goal. And then on the bottom right is our process called CATO. So consolidated alcohol deoxygenation and oligomerization. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but basically, yeah, it's a new technology, and yeah, our goal is to commercialize this. Next slide, please. Okay, here you go. All right, so top left here shows our CATO process. So basically, if you consider hydrous ethanol coming into our process, going through a low cost metal exchange catalyst to produce a combination of aromatic and aliphatic hydrocarbons, as well as water. And then on the top right kind of shows our gasoline product. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what this technology does. Next slide, please. Okay, here we go. This slide here is very important in that it really encompasses what this technology does. On the left shows the 4 feedstocks that we work with. So sugarcane, corn, kind of one first generation hydrocarbon fuels. Third down there, you can kind of see emerging second generation fuels. We show a picture of wood chips. And then on the bottom left, the future, which is a cool new technology we're working on in taking carbon dioxide. We show flue gas here, but we actually can take it from fermentation processes where it's more like 99%, and then also take it from, just biodigestion, so anaerobic digestion processes. So we can take that CO2 with inexpensive electricity and convert it to methanol. But anyways, these 4 feedstocks on the left here go through existing processes that are out there, and they make a combination of different alcohols. So methanol, ethanol, propanol, and then all the way up to, we've explored up to C8 alcohols, so octanol. And you go through our process, consolidate alcohol deoxidation, and you make a combination of different products. And so on the top right, if you can see it okay, plastics is one of the main things we're after. So this is benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, chemical product that can be used in making plastics. And then also second one down, which is very important in the near term, which is renewable LPG. Believe it or not, I mean, there's not much incentives out there right now for renewable LPG, but they're coming. So that's a new product that we're after. Third one down here is high octane gasoline. So this is the first product that we introduced with the Department of Energy funding. And yeah, we make 104 octane gasoline. So it's nice to blend into conventional fuel. Jet fuel is a fourth one down there on the bottom right there. Jet fuel is one that we're working on now. We make about 40% of our product could be considered a jet fuel. With the Department of Energy funding, we're focusing on making that 80 to 90% of our product. And then finally on the bottom right is diesel. So we'll be tackling that a little bit later. So next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, this is very interesting. So if you look at the x-axis here, so billions of gallons per year, and then on the left, you see ethanol, jet fuel, diesel, gasoline in the United States, and what we see is ethanol is about 16 to 17 billion gallons per year. You look at jet, diesel, and gasoline, and it's much larger. And what we hope to do, since we basically convert ethanol into these different products, we hope to explode the ethanol market. So this is what the slide shows. Yep. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. Yep. So yeah, patents, we're very well protected with respect to patents. We licensed five different technologies from Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and that's going pretty well. We've also added on 3 additional patents on top of that, and we have 2 more in the works. So strong freedom to operate analysis as well on the technology. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, here we go. So yeah, talking about CapEx and OpEx. if you look at the capital costs for this installation, it's about 25 cents per annual gallon, so about $15 million capital costs increase to convert ethanol into different hydrocarbons based on a 60 million gallon per year plant. So that's very important. So it's a minimal capex based on what we can do. Okay, so we can convert ethanol into hydrocarbons, and it's that's the flexibility that we offer at minimal capex. And then the OpEx is basically based on basically catalyst replacement costs. So, okay, next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So this one talks about Technip. So Vertimass chose to work with Technip for rapid implementation of the technology. Of making catalytic technologies that scale up commercially, and so we've worked with them. And the important part here in the bottom left is when you look at their demonstration operations, they will guarantee a scale up of 1 million times up to what we want for commercial plant demonstrations. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, this slide just talks to kind of the validation of the technology. So, we first had this award here, $2 million award from Department of Energy to scale up the technology to gasoline, basically a green gasoline and a BTEX. And the success rate of getting these awards are kind of less than 5%. So very happy to get that award. And then over time, we increased the yields from 36% to 80% plus. We dropped the conversion factor by a factor of 10, and we've had different technology and cost validation by due diligence over DOE contract life. So different people checking out the technology to make sure it's secure. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is really cool. Anyone who's interested in our technology, so we had a PNAS, National Academy of Sciences publication on the technology, and it's from 19 co-authors and 12 different industrial, academic, and government institutions. And we'd be happy to share that with anyone who's interested in the technology. But basically what it does is it shares some of the technology. We don't tell everything, but it shares the technology, it shares the costs, and it also shares the life cycle analysis as well. Yep. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you look at the Cato process integration with the ethanol producers, I don't know if there's anyone on the call right now from who's an ethanol producer, but basically what we do is we want to pull 40%, basically pull it off the beer column. Water is good for us with respect to holding our reaction in place, and so our goal is to pull off 40% ethanol. So basically what you see is the horizontal line in the blue, and then anything above that is the typical process that we see at the ethanol producer plant, and then down below is what we intend to do for our plant. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this is kind of cool. Over the last 2 years with the Department of Energy support. So they funded us to improve this technology, taking it from Oak Ridge National Labs and really trying to prove it out at a commercial scale. And what we did was take it, when you look at the x-axis here, basically, yeah, yep, there you go. Basically 20 months of development, basically 2 years. What we did was took the technology at the original liquid hydrocarbon yield of about 35%, and we advanced that over time to produce 90+% liquid hydrocarbons. So yeah, this technology is really cool because, you know, now we can make how do you want to say it? Now we can make any renewable hydrocarbon product. That's it. So we can make LPG, we can do gasoline, we can do jet fuel. It's very scalable. So yeah, this is the cool thing about the technology. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So this is kind of interesting. So this is, again, part of the paper in the National Academy of Sciences, is it talks about the conversion cost to take 40% ethanol, when you compare that to making it a 40% alcohol to 100% alcohol for a usable fuel, and you compare that to what we make it for in our process. So what happens is we're very close to getting there. So yeah, very, very big improvement over the past 2 years. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so this, again, just a repeat of the previous example, which shows that yeah, we can convert it at very low cost. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so we talk about awards, and yeah, we're the first winners of the National Corn Growers Association Award, and so that was really cool to get. So they were looking for ways to increase the corn demand over time, and yeah, we're the first winners of the award. We have this second award from Department of Energy to accelerate commercialization to jet fuel. So it's really cool. And then third bullet down here, ChemCat Bio Award to investigate the catalyst stabilization over time using the sophisticated tools that the national laboratories have. We're also ranked at one point number 18 top 40 companies in the advanced bio. Yep, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is really interesting. So the IEA had a report on sustainable aviation fuels and their production costs over the past 2 years. And what we did was just basically plot out what's important here. And on the left axis, what you see is minimum fuel selling price for sustainable aviation fuels. And on the bottom axis, what you see here is the 30 or so different technologies that are feedstocks that are available. And on the right four columns are our technology based on different feedstocks. And what you see is that we are one of the lowest cost producers of SAF out there. One thing to point out as well, on the horizontal dash line that you see there, the average HEFA jet fuel selling price, $650 per gallon last year. So yeah, I mean, you see respect for these different technologies, but you also see, you know, the margins as well. So that's it on that one. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some of the advantages that we offer, maximize product flexibility, profit and flexibility. So for these ethanol producers, you know, it's awesome to include this technology. You know, it gives them the ability to maximize their profits by switching fuels. So I think I'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, efficiency as well. It gives them the ability to reduce their water footprint of the plant. So this technology basically removes water molecule from ethanol, and when you do that, you can you know, lower your water footprint, and it's about 20%, roughly speaking. So that's another nice efficiency gain. Production increase, third bullet down there is that we offer the ability to debottleneck ethanol plants. So if they're bottlenecked at the distillation column, we offer the ability to you know, pull from that distillation column to produce fuels. So that's another potential benefit. And then the last one is when you have ethanol, you know, typically it's trucked out or railed out, and with this technology, you're able to you know, use the existing distribution system, so that minimizes logistical costs. So, yep. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this one's pretty cool. So what we do here is, in the last 10 years or so, what we do is we project out, you know, if an ethanol producer had this technology, you know, how would they increase their margin? So in this case, their margins increased a little bit, but when you consider LCFS, next slide, please. Boom. Yeah, that's when you see it right there. So you see the margin increase. I mean, it's significant. It's, you know, on the order of 30 to 50% increase in their margins. So we think this is very disruptive. Next slide, please. Yeah, when you look at our potential customers in the United States, I think you guys are all familiar with this. On the top left, 220 plants in the United States for ethanol production. In Brazil, you probably have just under 400 plants, and then in the EU, you have roughly 225 plants. So there's a big market out there. We are in discussion with them on the bottom left there. We are in discussion with 9 U.S. producers and 4 international producers to apply this technology. Okay, yeah. So this one's really interesting and it's new. So I hope there's SAF people on the phone. So if you look at the top right, the ideal jet fuel mix, okay, is a combination of these 4 things. So cycloalkanes, normal alkanes in the blue, isoalkanes, and aromatics. So these 4 things make up the ideal jet fuel mix. If you look at the left, conventional ATJ, so alcohol to jet, you know, what you see from LanzaTech, from Biogy or Swedish Biofuels, basically what they make is normal alkanes and isoalkanes, so saturated hydrocarbons. If you look at the bottom left on what we make, SAFs, we make aromatics, we make cycloalkanes, and when you combine the 2, then you make the most ideal jet fuel. So in a way, we're competitive with, with other ATJ technologies, but we're also complementary, if you will, with other ATJ technologies, Fisher Tropsch technology. Yep. Next slide, please. Okay, yes. So what this slide shows here is the carbon intensity of the jet fuel that we make is pretty much inherent of what you come in with the CI score of the ethanol. So with starch, we come in probably about 46%, and I'm using kind of the latest study from Scully et al. From the average ethanol plants in the United States. Sugarcane, we're about 65%. Cellulosic, we're just above 95%. And then for atmospheric and flue gas CO2, which is a new thing we're working on, it's 100%. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is some really cool new stuff that we're working on. And a lot of the ethanol producers now are taking their CO2 from the fermentation and running it through CCS, basically. So, putting that carbon dioxide from the fermentation into existing wells as storage, carbon sequestration storage. So when they do that, they drop their CI score by 20 points or so. The other cool thing that we're working on is, okay, say you take that ethanol, you turn that ethanol into low CI fuels by taking our co-product, which is basically a BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, xylene on the top right. What we do there is, if you're sequestering it into a plastic, for example, you're able to lower the CI score even by 20 points. So the interesting part about this is now you can take, corn ethanol, and you can be at 0 CI score. So it's very, very interesting. Next slide, please. Yeah. So our team here is basically on the top left here, Dr. Charles Wyman. He's been great to work with over the past, 10 years I've been working with him. Awesome experience, and he actually wrote the handbook on bioethanol. So just to give you a little bit of his experience. Myself, John Hannan, so I, had a lot of experience in technical due diligence on different technologies. And actually, Charlie wrote to me and said, "John, check out this technology, see if it makes financial sense." And I checked it out, and wow, yeah, made some really cool stuff. Tom Mullen, Executive Vice President, awesome to work with, and then Bill Shopoff on our right to finance the company. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is interesting too. So this is the first time where Oak Ridge National Laboratories has allowed the principal investigators of the technology to be involved with the startup company. And so we have Dr. Martin Keller on the top left there. He's the actual director of National Renewable Energy Labs, so NREL right now, and been great to work with them. And in the middle, Dr. Brian Davidson, Chief Scientific Officer for Oak Ridge National Labs. And on the top right, Chaitanya Narula, who really founded the technology. So it's great that they're part of the technology in the company. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just kind of take home messages here from Vertimass. So the technology, since we convert ethanol into hydrocarbons, it offers the ability to eliminate the U.S. blend wall. So it's very important there in the top bullet. Second bullet down is, the ability to convert it into jet fuel and BTEX is very important. Oop. Yep. Third bullet down, again, a low capex, low opex operation to convert ethanol into hydrocarbon fuels. Fourth step down is co-production of BTEX can really reduce the corn ethanol carbon intensity. Fifth bullet down here, a lot of technology, 10 patents total. We were successful in getting a BTO award to scale this technology up. And now we got a second award to convert it to jet fuel. And then Technip FMC is very close to, they're pretty much ready to go. I mean, we think we're ready within a year to make sustainable aviation fuel. And then, on the bottom bullet is Vertimass seeks ethanol producers to commercialize the technology. That's it. Yep.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hannan. And let's, several questions have come into the chat box, but I'm going to pick out a couple and then we'll save the rest for when you get back with your roundtable discussion later on this morning. Can you comment on ethanol as a starting feedstock versus the N-butanol or the isobutanol? Is there a yield advantage to start with a particular alcohol?
Yeah, that's a great question. With ethanol, it's the most widely produced biofuel in the world, and it's very low cost. Okay, so ethanol is a great starting point. With respect to isobutanol and N-butanol, like from Agivo, yes, we can do that as well. But what we find is it's a bit more expensive. But when you consider the mass yields are better from N-butanol and isobutanol to hydrocarbons versus ethanol into hydrocarbons. Yep.
We had a question on slide 11 when you were talking about the economics. They were wondering if those were based on going all the way to purified marketable products or just the liquid hydrocarbon mixture.
Yeah, so this technology it produces a blend stock. So we're interested in getting it into the market as a blend stock. So yeah, it's not an end, it's a blend stock. Yeah.
Thank you again, Dr. Hannan. I know you're going to be back with the whole group a little bit later on. We'll try to work some more of the questions in at that time, but we have to move on. So thanks for your time today.
Yes, sir.
Next, we're going to turn our attention to fatty acid-based biorefinery technologies. And with us is Dr. Wayne Siemas. Dr. Siemas is a Chester Fritz Distinguished Professor with the Department of Chemical Engineering and the Director of North Dakota Sunrise at the University of North Dakota. His areas of expertise are in the invention and development of renewable energy chemical technologies, in mitigating the environmental impacts of coal utilization, and general process engineering and economic analysis. He is the director of the Sustainable Energy Research Initiative and supporting education program Sunrise, a multi-university, multidisciplinary research and outreach center. He is a named inventor on 8 UND US patents. Dr. Siemas, welcome to the Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable.
Thank you, Dan. So next slide, please. So I am from North Dakota, but if you don't know where Grand Forks, North Dakota is, it's right across the Red River from Minnesota. So my office is actually 2 miles from the border. So So, and 23% of the students at the University of North Dakota actually come from Minnesota. We are a research university. We're the largest one after the University of Minnesota until you get all the way over to the West Coast. So today, Luca asked me to talk a bit about some technologies we've been developing for the last decade. And I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about of a few newer technologies that are directly related to using the rest of the corn plant, the corn stovers. So, but first we're going to talk about the fatty acid-based biorefinery technologies we've been developing. Next slide, please. So, our technology is not a hydrotreating technology. It is a cracking technology, but it's a non-catalytic cracking technology. It's not purely non-catalytic, but what we do is we separate out the first decomposition reaction, which occurs without a catalyst, even in hydrotreating or catalytic cracking processes, from the catalytic part, which allows us to have much simpler, smaller, and more effective deoxygenation catalysis than you would get in traditional hydrotreating plants. I actually began developing this technology around 2003, so we were actually out ahead of the curve, and then everybody caught up to us and leaped past us based on the roadmap that DOE developed. However, we did develop this technology completely. So this little scheme shows you kind of how it works. Any fatty acid-based oil will work in this technology. It can be a triacylglyceride oil like corn oil, soybean oil, etc. It can be a free fatty acid like you'd get from animal fats, so chicken rendering fats, waste, restaurant oils, lipids from bacteria and algae. All of these can be run in this technology. And in fact, for algae, it has a big advantage in that you don't have to remove the cellular debris and the proteins from the lipids before you run them, because there's no catalyst in that first bed for them to mess up. So what we do is we feed that to a cracking reactor, and then we do some fractionation. And so in the last talk, he talked about developing a liquid hydrocarbon mixture. That would be what we would get at the end of this cracking reactor. But then we purify that all the way to final products in this technology. So, so we generate some syngas, LPG, naphtha. Naphtha is basically the feedstock for gasoline, but chemical grade naphtha is also valuable. We produce jet fuel. We can produce both military grade and commercial grade. And then diesel fuels, we can do diesel fuel number 1, number 2, and then some fuel oil. And then the residual material, the heavy stuff that inevitably comes from all of these processes, we can also exploit that and turn that into dense carbon products. The one that we fully developed is anode grade coke, but you can also turn that into we're working on technology to turn that into carbon fiber. Next slide, please. So why do we crack it? Well, cracking breaks the chemical bonds, and that reduces the molecular weight of the molecules, and therefore its freeze point and its viscosity. So when you transesterify a vegetable oil like corn oil to make biodiesel, you're just knocking off the double bond O group on the end. That's the one that's on the right here. And basically you leave the rest of the molecule intact. In cracking, what we do is we break the next bonds down. And so we get a predictable, I mean, we can predict exactly based on the inlet composition what the outlet composition is going to be of this oil. But basically it models the way petroleum was originally developed geologically, but of course on the time scale of minutes instead of millions of years. Next slide, please. So catalysts become fouled when you crack. by coke and tar formation and feedstock impurities, just as they do in the petroleum industry. And if those tars form onto your catalyst, then the only way to get them off really is to oxidize them off to CO2. By not using those catalyst tars, we can recover up to 10% more of the feedstock carbon and turn that into valuable products. And this is a significant advantage because 90% of the operating costs of these type of processes is associated with the feedstock. Plus, these high value carbon products that we make from that tarry type material, we call them oligomers in chemistry, they have the highest margins of any of the products that can be produced. So you can actually make quite a bit more money if you can take them all the way to carbon fiber. In fact, the carbon fiber option would be so valuable that you would try to run the plant to make more tar rather than less tar to make more money. There's no yield advantage really in catalytic cracking over non-catalytic cracking. We've demonstrated that in our lab. It's just that the catalysts allow you to do secondary reactions. So for example, if you had a metal dope zeolite in there, similar to Vertimass process, you could then generate lots of aromatics right in the one reactor. But again, the disadvantage is you get these tars that form. The other advantage is we can accept dirty fuel feedstocks. And in fact, we've taken some Minnesota corn oil right out of the ethanol plant. So the real beat up just crude corn oil. And we've run that in this process, and I'll show you some yields later, but they're basically identical to the yields that we get from purified food grade corn oil. Next slide. So when you crack, you get a distribution of molecules. This slide looks pretty similar to one of the ones that John showed earlier. And the advantage for that is that you have diversity in your fuel. So hydrotreating processes don't really produce a lot of diversity in their fuel. So they have to be blended with other things to add in these other components. But ours makes complete fuels that are very similar to the petroleum fuels that they're replacing. And so they have a lot of dynamic range. So, you know, you want your fuels to operate in low temperatures and in high temperatures and other environmental conditions. And so having this diversity of compounds actually makes better fuel. Next slide, please. All right, so talking about economics. So the total capital investment for a base plant that is going to just produce what I showed you before, which is primarily fuels with a few byproducts, costs about $130 million for 160 million gallon per year soybean oil feed. Corn oil is very similar to soybean oil in composition, so these values would be similar for corn oil. Canola oil is a little bit different, and so in that case, the cost per gallon would be slightly less as the yields of the more valuable things are a little bit higher. But basically, you go through the reactor, we recover the lights, and then we go through two columns, just like you would in a petroleum refinery, an atmospheric and a vacuum column. And from this first drum, the entire polar phase, which looks like water, turns out it's actually virtually pure acetic acid. Next slide. So then we go through deoxygenation or decarboxylation. And this is another big advance that we made in our lab, is we were able to develop technology to deoxygenate that carboxylic acid group off the fatty acids using a nickel catalyst and using steam as a facilitator, but no hydrogen, external hydrogen source. So essentially, the catalyst breaks off a group. That part of that group goes through a shift reaction with the steam, and then that liberates the hydrogen needed to terminate the bonds on the molecule. So we end up with decarboxylated or deoxygenated stable fuels through these two decarboxylation reactors. But they are much, much smaller than if we put the feed material directly into that, as you would in a hydrotreater. So this gives you an idea of the yields. We'll make, in this case from soybean oil, around 31 gallons per year of naphtha 45 of jet fuel, 45 of diesel, and 10 of fuel oil. And again, these meet ASTM specifications. Next slide. And then in the light ends, we're going to make some syngas. We expect that that syngas would be probably consumed on site to provide the energy needed for the process. But then the LPG or the butane, in this case, we put the propane with the syngas. We can get 10 million gallons per year of that. If we bring the propane down with the butane, that goes up to about 15 million. Next slide. So just a little more about that deoxygenation. So nickel catalysts, we've demonstrated that they're capable of deoxygenating the cracked material to the high conversion levels needed to make Jet A1 fuel. Under a reducing environment, most catalysts have a stronger activity, actually, nickel catalysts than palladium on activated carbon, which is the carbon that's typically material typically used for these type of reactions. But nickel is a whole lot cheaper than palladium, so it's a much more cost-effective way to do it. And then using steam allows us to get rid of using hydrogen in the reactor. It also keeps inhibits tar formation on the catalyst, allowing the reaction to go longer before it has to be regenerated. So, and the amount of material, it also breaks the double bonds for any double bonds that are left going in there, the olefins, so that less than 0.5 weight% have that, which means the fuels are oxidatively stable and will meet the oxidative stability tests of the ASTM fuel standards. Next slide. So just some actual data from the lab. You can see that we've been able to reduce the hydrogen rate down to 0 with a steam rate of very low steam rate compared to the reaction rate. So it's only 3% of the inlet reactant of the oil going, the diesel or the jet going into that reactor for steam. And the data here down at the bottom is the product, and that's measuring carboxylic acids by acidity, which is just a simple way to measure them. But basically it shows that there aren't any of those left in the product. Next slide. So we actually were able to use both a nickel on carbon, a nickel on silica, and a nickel silica aluminozirconium oxide mix. And we found that any of these work pretty similarly. And the cheapest of those is the nickel and silica oxide. So that's what we're using for our commercial catalyst. Next slide, please. All right. But that plant is attractive with fuel incentives. But if you wanted a plant that could compete head up with a petroleum refinery with no tax incentives, without any of the tax breaks, and at commercial value for the products. So pricing the products as petroleum products, not hypothetical near values. You can make money as soon as you start collecting short chain fatty acids out of the material. So this plant with the fatty acid recovery module is actually 10 million cheaper than the base case, because we're going to recover most of the smaller fatty acids. And so those deoxygenation reactors decrease in size substantially. And in fact, we only need one. And so there's a decrease of 6 cents per gallon in operating costs, and 75 cents per gallon is what it'll cost for the in capacity for the facility. Next slide. But there's a revenue increase of 260 million a year. And we get that by recovering the short chain fatty acids. Now, some of these short chain fatty acids are very rare and hard to make any other way. As a consequence, the odd numbered ones, heptanoic, nanonoic, these acids have very high prices because they're not naturally synthesized by bacteria. You can make the even numbered ones, but not the odd number ones. But we get all of them. So basically the first, just recovering the acetic acid will pay for all the rest of these columns. So it's a lot of columns. They're not very big, but it's a big distillation train to recover all of them to final products. But even with all that extra equipment, the cost of the plant went down, not up. And you can see there's just one decarboxylator now off the end, and that goes to feed the hydrocarbon fuels. Next slide, please. So another option is to process the heavy ends. So going back just to the base case, that'll increase the cost by 10 million over the base case. But if we can make this mesophase pitch to turn into carbon fiber, which is what we're developing in our lab right now, the revenue increase is $500 million a year. So basically it triples the revenue from the plant just by making that. Even though less than 4% of the inlet carbon ends up in that pitch, carbon fiber is so valuable, it just makes, blows all the other economics out of the water. Next slide, please. Okay, we've run lots of different oils, and what we've basically found is the yields are slightly different of the three primary products, jet, naphtha, and gas. This one is maximizing jet as opposed to diesel. But basically, any of the oils will give you fairly similar yields. There's slight differences from oil to oil, but those differences are much smaller than will be the opportunity cost from the inlet oils. So I think somebody taking this technology and using it would want to go find the least expensive oils they can get and then run those rather than looking for the maximum product values, because the products are going to be fairly similar in the revenues, but you're going to get a lot, you're going to make your savings by buying the lowest cost material. And it is a feedstock flexible process, so you can change in a day from one to another. Next slide, please. I told you that we can run crude corn oil. So if you had a group of ethanol plants that wanted to use this technology to exploit their crude corn oil, you could take that crude corn oil, say from a group of 4 to 8 plants, probably make a commercial scale size plant to run this oil through this non-catalytic cracking process. And you can see that the yields here are within statistics, essentially the same as a food grade refined corn oil. Next slide. All right, so if you're looking at a complete corn biorefinery, all right, all the technologies here in blue are commercialized, and this shows you where this technology would fit in that grand scheme. So Veramax was up here at the ethanol butanol and adding a bolt-on there. Our technology would pull the crude oil, the corn oil, and bolt the technology on there. Or again, it could also be used for other technologies. Next slide, please. But what and that technology, by the way, is completely developed. We have patents protecting that technology. The only step left really is to have the fuel certified by the ASTM working fuel certification community. And if one of those, you know, and that would be the next step, and then it's ready for scale up to commercial. And the front end of that process has all been done at the fairly large pilot scale. The back end, the deoxygenation reactors, have been done at the engineering scale. What we're working on now, though, is the other part of the corn plant, the stover, everything that's left over. So we're not the only ones working on that. A lot of people have done so. But if you look at NREL and other entities, they've developed technologies to separate the sugars from the lignin pretty efficiently now. What we've been doing in our lab is then taking the sugars, which are primarily glucose and xylose, and converting those into these 4 building block acids: levulinic, lactic, acetic acid, and formic. Then we're developing technologies then to take the levulinic acid to liquid polyols. So if you think about polyurethane can be a very stiff polymer. If you blend in this liquid polymer, polyol, it makes it flexible. Same thing with polystyrene. So it's used for like your seat cushions that are flexible. The automobile industry uses this for all of their polyurethane dashboards, things like that. So it's a very big market. And we think that's the best path right now for levulinic acid. Lactic acid has lots of uses. One of those is PLA, but it can also be reacted with other compounds to produce renewable polyesters and other polymers. And the type of lactic acid you get from a sugar, unless you do it through fermentation, you're not really going to be able to produce PLA today, but you can produce these other polymers. So we're working on those technologies, and we're also working on the lignin technologies. Lignin can be divided really into two parts, usable fragments and unusable stuff. Fortunately, now for wood lignin, most of it's the unusable, over half of it. But fortunately for corn stover, forage sorghum, plants like that, about 90% of it is usable lignin. And we're working on technologies right now to convert that into fuels and chemicals. And we also have a large DOE grant for scale up to take some technology developed at the Washington State University and NREL to develop cyclohexanes for jet fuel from that lignin. We also have other technologies we're working on in-house for that. Next slide. So that's just a taste of what we're working on now, but I would be happy to talk to anybody in the future about any more of that. So, but that just gives you kind of a drink out of the fire hose of what all the work we've been doing up at North Dakota in renewable fuels and chemicals. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions now or during the roundtable.
We'll have some for you at the roundtable, Dr. Siemas, but we do have a couple that have come in, and I'm going to run you through those real quick here to kind of get us caught up. We have one participant today who's asking if you are researching the use of industrial hemp as one of your potential feedstocks, and if you have, how has it performed?
Okay, so hemp has a very different chemical structure to it than a fatty acid oil or than the normal lignin you get off corn stover. We have done some development with hemp in-house here, and we're working with the North Dakota Hemp Association right now to look at organosolve type processes to develop pulp from that hemp. But we haven't. But we really haven't been able to adapt our processes, the processes I've talked about today, to work on hemp. But we do have some other work going on hemp.
Then a question about the timeline on a ASTM certification. They just put a comment at the end that they have heard that it's kind of they're moving slow.
It can be. We have some pipelines to certification through some partner universities, particularly the University of Dayton, which allows us to get to that certification. We believe probably could do it in 6 months. Even after that certification, I think most of the engine manufacturers will want to do their own independent tests of the fuel, particularly if we're looking at 100% fuels, and ours are 100% compatible. So, so I would say probably realistically, from the time we would fund that effort, it would probably take us a year. And at that same time, we could scale up and pilot the deoxygenation, and then it should be ready for commercial.
Well, thank you for the presentation. We look forward to additional comments when we get to the roundtable here later on this morning. We move to our third presenter today. Our Fueling the Future conversation continues with Dr. David Babson. Dr. Babson currently serves as the Program Director, Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, U.S. Department of Energy. His focus at ARPA-E includes bioenergy, agricultural systems innovation, and carbon management. Prior to joining ARPA-E, Babson served as the Senior Advisor for Renewable Energy, Natural Resources, and the Environment in the Office of the Chief Scientist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So please welcome Dr. Babson.
Thanks for having me, everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Dan. talk a little bit about one of the programs that I run at ARPA-E called EcoSynBio. And, you know, some of the changing trends in energy and, you know, the climate space that are impacting the way we think about new technology development in the bioeconomy space and what sorts of things are going to be necessary for the future. I apologize, some of the slides that I have here got a little bit mixed up in the conversion into this one unified deck, but I think most of them are here. So let's just go to the next one and we'll dive right in. First, I want to mention, for those of you that don't know what ARPA-E is, ARPA-E is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. This is a relatively new agency, just 12 years old at this point. It is modeled after DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and it's the Department of Energy's moonshot research, you know, office, if you will. We are, you know, we don't operate on a you know, strategic plan. And the programs that we have are really designed and driven by individual program directors who come in for a short period of time and really try to develop a futuristic vision for our economy and for our energy space, and then to take on really high risk and potentially high reward transformative types of technologies. Next slide. And the types of solutions we're trying to offer are exactly what you would expect from the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency, things like resilient energy infrastructure, affordable, sustainable energy, U.S. economic development, leadership in science and technology. But the thing that I think about the most, the thing that motivates the programs that I'm developing, that I'm running, and even the one that I'm going to talk about today, is climate change mitigation. Next slide. I always like to start my presentations with this figure because I think it highlights the real challenges we face, and it kind of also highlights you know, the pressure points for the technologies that we need to develop to address global challenges like climate change. So this plot shows the net GHG path that we need to follow to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees of warming. That's the red line in the center. And, you know, we know what's causing climate change. We know the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from our industries and from our energy sector are causing climate change. And so, you know, we know that the solution is to reduce emissions. Well, we haven't done enough of that for long enough that now we're in a place where not only do we have to zero out emissions, we actually have to go negative. So we have to actually build out the capacity to remove more carbon than we emit. And the blue shaded region below the zero line here shows the net negative emissions that we need to be able to, you know, achieve. And you can see that the contribution of negative emissions to net emissions is quite substantial even before the crossover point. This is to say that we need to begin developing and deploying negative emissions technologies immediately, and thinking about how the, you know, technologies that we have to reduce emissions, like lower carbon fuels and energy, how their inefficiencies actually increase the work that needs to be done by this future negative emissions industry. Next slide. One of the things I want to highlight about that, this is one of these slides that got kind of mangled a little bit, is that, you know, the amount of negative emissions that we're going to need is about 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal by 2050 and 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal by 2100. And so the Department of Energy is essentially predicting that the largest industry on the face of the earth by 2050 and certainly by 2100 is going to be carbon removal and management. Indeed, 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal at 2100, to give you a sense of the scale of that, to get to 20 gigatons, you'd have to add together a bunch of different material flows. Like, for example, all of the, you know, material flows in U.S. trucking, all the packages that are shipped and arrive at your door from Amazon and all those things, all the material flows in U.S. pipelines. And then on top of that, you would have to add global cement and global iron ore production to get to 20 gigatons. It's an enormous challenge. This is an enormous predicted, currently non-existent industry that needs to be developed. Next slide. And there's a number of strategies for servicing a negative emissions industry. This includes biological approaches that would take advantage of the natural carbon cycling into and through natural ecosystems and managed land. You develop technologies to augment that natural carbon cycling and increase the capacity of those environments to, store carbon. There are engineered approaches like direct air capture and direct ocean capture, enhanced weathering and those sorts of things. And then there's hybrid approaches that take advantage of the natural carbon cycling into environmental systems, into ag systems, and into biomass. And then you would, couple together that stored carbon and biomass with an engineered strategy downstream to ensure that carbon wouldn't get back into the atmosphere. Because the scale of this future negative emissions industry is going to be so big, there's no silver bullet technology that's going to be able to do it. We're going to have to develop all of these different strategies and strategically deploy them into environments and economies that make the most sense. Next slide. I mean, this really highlights what I was just saying, is that all of these various strategies are going to have to be developed and strategically deployed. Next slide. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about the negative emissions industry that doesn't exist. And the reason I point this out is because this is going to be coming up and it's going to be abutted with the challenges that we face in our current carbon-based economy and our current vision for how we produce carbon-based products that are necessary to address climate change while reducing emissions. And our future economy isn't going to be so much low carbon as much as it's going to be new carbon. So there is a role for us thinking about how we synthesize and produce carbon-based products like fuels, and chemicals, materials. And they're going to need to be produced in a way that is not just lower carbon, but carbon neutral and even carbon negative. And the reason is because, like I said, any inefficiencies in your production of a renewable carbon-based product is, represents molecules of CO2 that are released. And every molecule that goes into the air is another molecule of CO2 that's going to have to be pulled out of it with energy and resource requirements in that negative emissions space. Next slide. So from a technology standpoint, there are really two buckets that need to be filled now. And the technologies that fill these are different, and where we get the carbon and how we use it are different, and now they're really important for us to consider. So we're used to, filling this high energy carbon bucket from our bioeconomy because we've been thinking about renewable fuels for a long time. We thought that the way that we could address climate change would be through, displacing petroleum, reducing those emissions. And now that we're in a space where not only do we have to continue displacing and driving down the emissions from our fossil industry and our fuels down to zero, we also need to build up this big negative emissions industry. And so there's new types of technologies, there's new types of policies that need to be developed, and there's new pressures on how we source and how we produce the renewable fuels that we need. Because as I said earlier, these two buckets are connected. Any inefficiency in the production of a fuel represents carbon that's lost that needs to be pulled out of the atmosphere. So when the administration makes a commitment to reduce the emissions from aviation fuels by 50%, that's a very ambitious and good target. The fact of the matter is, as the amount of aviation fuel we use increases, unless we can actually drive those emissions reductions down and begin generating carbon neutral aviation fuels, we're actually creating more work for ourselves on the carbon removal side. And so we need to start thinking about that and really set the ambitions for our bioeconomy even higher. Next slide. In the background to this new way of thinking that there are these two buckets that need to be filled, there are some changes in our economy that are important to note here. We are deploying more wind, more solar, more renewables. That is driving down the cost and the carbon intensity of power. There's a lot of opportunities to leverage low cost, low carbon power to actually decarbonize our carbon-based economy. As John was talking earlier, from Vertimax was talking earlier about the future of leveraging low cost, low carbon power to perhaps drive the production of electrofuels. That is something that can happen. And there's other opportunities to leverage low cost, low carbon power to change the types of processes that we can design and the types of fuels and products that we can produce. The other thing that's happening is the types of fuels that we are going to demand are changing. As we move to electrify the entire light duty fleet, all the car companies now are making commitments to have only EVs on the roads or in their sales fleets within 1.5 decades. That's going to change the types of fuels that we need. So now we view ethanol as largely a blend stock for gasoline, but as we've heard earlier, now we're beginning to think of ethanol as a platform chemical for other types of aviation fuels and things that are not amenable to electrification. And then we need to recognize that the bioeconomy and our vision for it is constrained by land. We need to actually develop technologies that allow us to do more and make more with the sustainable biomass that we are capable of producing, and also thinking about how this future negative emissions industry is going to create a pull for biomass in ways that we can anticipate, but that we can't anticipate the impacts to established bioeconomy supply chains. Next slide. And so we ask the question, how should we manage CO2? If we know that we need to do both of these things at once, develop renewable products that are carbon neutral to displace petroleum so that we can drive down emissions, and also scale, near-term, low-cost, energy-efficient strategies to do negative emissions, we need to think about, what are the new economic markets and drivers for how we're going to source carbon for these different things. I can tell you that some of the prospects for those electrofuels begin to look a lot better when you think about the fact that you need to tie in the marginal costs of land in a world where we're going to have a greater growing demand for new carbon. Next slide. And we're familiar with the bioeconomy concept, of course. What our current view is that the renewable carbon comes from biomass. That might be changing, and we really do need to begin thinking about CO2 as something. But for now, we kind of view the bioeconomy as you produce renewable biomass in a sustainable manner, you apply a conversion technology and produce all of these different products. Next slide. And in this future world, we need to think about those feedstocks and how then the technologies would apply to convert them into valuable products in this context. We know we need to drive down emissions down to zero. And as I said, not only do we need to drive them down to zero, we got to go negative. We have to do the same thing on the land side. Through innovation, we're going to need to slow the rate of conversion of natural lands over to ag lands down to zero, and actually get to a point where we can begin converting ag lands back to natural lands. And so, how do we do that? We're going to have to do that through innovation. Next slide. So, we are trying to think about innovating in relevant ways for the bioeconomy for the future. The programs that I have kind of focused in some of these areas. All of my programs right now are situated along the bioeconomy supply chain. We have, Terran Roots are programs that I inherited from a previous program director. These are programs focused on identifying, useful attributes in crops to improve their yields above ground. That's the Terra program, or increase plant systems' ability to remove and store carbon underground. That's the Roots program, by identifying phenotypes and genotypes that confer deeper roots, more recalcitrant roots, root systems that are capable secreting long-term carbon storage compounds, those sorts of things. The Smart Farm program was the first program I launched when I came to ARPA-E. This program seeks to connect farm practices to carbon markets so that we can measure the carbon harvest with the same accuracy and at the same low cost that we do other ag products, so that we can actually begin to view the ag space as as capable of servicing this future negative emissions industry. And then the EcoSymbio program I'm going to talk about here, because this is the one that focuses on how do we re-engineer conversion pathways to align with a vision that is, or a future that is going to be really focused on carbon efficiency, perhaps even carbon efficiency at the expense of energy efficiency. So next slide. And I'm going to talk about the EcoSymbio program. Next slide. So I talked about some of these relevant trends earlier. The ones that are most relevant for the thinking behind EcoSymbio and this program are, the changes in the renewable energy landscape. We've been deploying more wind, more solar. That's driving down both the cost and the carbon intensity of power. And similarly, we've seen commitments from private companies and elsewhere, and internationally and even domestically, carbon prices being set, where we're entering a world where in the future, the cost of wasting carbon is going to be greater than the potential price of avoiding it if you can avoid it through technologies that leverage low cost and low carbon power. Next slide. Indeed, one of the things that we are noticing now is that in this world where carbon is beginning to be priced, you begin to lose the energy value proposition from biomass, and it becomes in essence biomass becomes a concentrated form of carbon where you've done direct air capture without an engineered approach that required a bunch of energy. And so depending on how market forces play out and what these prices are and how you can connect carbon prices to ag systems and to biomass, we're really looking at trends of viewing biomass not as energy crops, but as carbon removal crops. Next slide. We're also seeing the projections from various climate models suggesting that the largest near-term, lowest cost means of achieving negative emissions is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. If that is the case, we're going to begin to see pressure in the bioeconomy to redirect biomass towards getting the CO2 out of it and getting it underground rather than getting higher energy dense hydrocarbons out of it. Next slide. And again, this kind of confirms that some of the although less land efficient but more low energy forms of carbon removal are going to be in the kind of the bikers category that will affect and influence trends in the bioeconomy. So what this plot's really showing is that the engineered approaches like direct air capture, because it's so energy intense, if we were to do the amount of carbon removal that we need to do with DAC, we're essentially saying we need to tax every single new kilowatt of renewable power by 5 to 8% to just power negative emissions. That's not going to be viable. So the ability to maximize the amount of carbon removal that you can get through the energy neutral or even energy positive approaches, from the bioeconomy are going to be valuable. We're going to need to do a bunch of DAC and DOC because they're going to be these are the last tons of carbon that are going to be there. But if you can minimize the amount of the engineered approaches that we need to employ, that's going to free up a lot of energy that we can use elsewhere, renewable energy that we use elsewhere in the economy. Next slide. So the idea really behind EcoSymbio was we were looking at the current bioeconomy. We're a 16 billion gallon per year ethanol bioeconomy. And the Ecosystem Bio program does not apply to only ethanol. It's actually, fermentation for all different types of things. It's biosynthesis for all types of different products, not just ethanol. But I use ethanol as an example because everyone knows this reaction. And this is the reaction, that is kind of the center of the bioeconomy. So in traditional fermentation, you feed yeast, sugar, they produce ethanol and CO2. Because ethanol is a 2-carbon compound and CO2 is a 1-carbon compound, you essentially lose a third of your carbon in that reaction alone. And, that's perfectly fine if you're using this to, carbonate your beer or flavor your wine. But in an industrial application, where you're going to use that ethanol for fuel blending or for upgrading into jet fuel or whatnot, that's a waste of carbon. It's a waste of resources. Next slide. We know that there are, some strategies that could be implemented that would allow us to, change up the pathway of fermentation such that it could be carbon optimized. And so this is a paper that was put out by James Leal's group in 2013 that theorized the non-oxidative glycolytic pathway, in which you could leverage external reducing equivalents to drive carbon flux to 100%. Next slide. Essentially, this type of pathway would change the traditional fermentation to this carbon optimized fermentation, whereby instead of just feeding the yeast sugar, you feed them sugar and a reducing equivalent like hydrogen, and now you could produce ethanol and the balance is water, where all of the carbon in your feedstock has now found its way into the ethanol product, and you've increased the capacity of the bioeconomy by 50% without using an additional kilogram of feedstock or another square inch of land. Next slide. And so the Ecosystem Bio program sought to kind of take advantage of this philosophy, not just this individual reaction, but generally, could we re-engineer conversion pathways, bioconversion pathways to be, the paradigm would be 100% carbon efficient. And we wanted to, our research vision was to allow us to kind of look at two different approaches. How we would, kind of enable industrial biochemistry through cell-free biocatalysis, but also re-engineer industrial microbiology, which is the heart of the current bioeconomy, to make these both, carbon efficient means of producing fuels and chemicals with maximum carbon efficiency. Next slide. So we set up, actually go back to the previous slide just for a second. I do want to highlight the logo that our logo people developed. The idea here was, and this is really at the heart of what we were trying to do, we wanted to connect the renewable energy economy with the bioeconomy and leverage renewable power to make the circular bioeconomy more carbon efficient. Next slide. So we established these global metrics. We said, look, if you can come up with a conversion pathway that accommodates external reducing equivalents, avoids CO2 evolution on a system basis, and accumulates products with greater embodied energy than primary feedstock, we want to see those pathways. We don't care if it's fermentation, we don't care if it's cell-free biocatalysis, we don't care if it's a combination of those things, but we want to see what they're doing. We're also really interested in some of this bio CO2 utilization sorts of things that were non-photosynthetic. So we wanted to be able to say, if you could get these external reducing equivalents from, things that could be produced from CO2, water, or both, then we're good to go. And they could be produced from electrocatalytically. Next slide. And we knew that there'd be a number of different strategies that people would come up with, and we did get proposals in all of these different areas. We knew that some teams would be looking at these non-oxidative glycolytic, pathways where you re-engineer the metabolism, like I showed. We could do, perhaps you could theoretically do for ethanol production. We knew that there'd be mixotrophic strategies where you have different types of microorganisms, some that are, capable of heterotrophic processes and others that are autotrophic, and they would be engineered to work together to maximize product flux. We knew gas fermentation was going to be in there. And we knew that we wanted to see some cell-free. We explicitly called this out. We gave some different, metrics in the funding opportunity around cell-free, just so that we can elicit some of these. We know these are a little bit further out, but we're excited about perhaps changing the paradigm for cell-free. Right now, people view cell-free technologies, it's used in pharmaceuticals for diagnostics and other stuff like that. Nobody views it as a platform for doing industrial biosynthesis, but we want to change that because there's some really cool stuff that can happen there. Next slide. And we did, put this BOA out last year. We selected teams, we announced them, and we actually kicked off this program recently, $35 million that we announced. These are the teams that we have involved, and we've situated their logos into the areas where they're roughly the types of technology space that they're working in. And you'll notice that some of these are actually kind of between some of these areas, which we didn't anticipate that there'd be some mixotrophic teams that are doing gas fermentation, ones that are doing some mixotrophic sorts of systems, but they're also doing metabolism engineering for carbon efficiency. And then we have a cell-free cohort that's really exciting and doing some really cool stuff here. So, happy to take some questions if we have time, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Babson, for that presentation. And yeah, we do have a couple of questions. I think we'll start with, have you looked at synthesizing carbon chain building? Which organisms and plants store energy in order to efficiently produce a longer carbon chain? Might be a word missing in that question someplace, but maybe you get the gist.
I kind of get the gist of it, actually. So this program, we didn't look at on the plant side. We were really looking at the conversion side. We're looking at, typically like, starches, sugars, how they're converted, and also CO2 as inputs. And then we wanted there to be some level of carbon efficiency improvements identified through the leveraging of external reducing equivalents. We looked at the conversion side there. However, there was a previous RPE program called Petro that looked at how you might engineer feedstock crops to be more amenable or more valuable for downstream biofuel synthesis, but that was an older program. This program looks at just the conversion side of things, and we didn't look at the plant side. Although I didn't talk about it today. I have these other programs in the ag space. We're thinking about carbon farming. We're looking at the fact that we may need to rethink what types of crops we produce and what types of attributes we select for in their breeding. If the bioeconomy transitions from being, an ethanol and biofuel bioeconomy more towards a BECCS or carbon removal bioeconomy, or some hybrid thereof, there's going to be different types of crops and needs, and there's going to be needs for different types of crop engineering in those cases.
We'll take one more here, and then we'll move to our panel discussion. But saying that we might need to be converting some of our farmland back to natural land makes some people on this call rather nervous. Can you expound on that?
I mean, it shouldn't make them nervous. In fact, one of the things that I'm looking into, like I said, for this new program, we're thinking about a carbon farming program. It wouldn't be that we would convert ag lands back to natural lands and then render it useless and its viability in the market non-existent. It would be that we need to actually develop new types of crops and management strategies to allow when we convert that land back for farmers to be able to profit from new carbon markets that are coming into place and ecosystem services markets. So what would happen is the land would be, changed in order to address different challenges and service new industries in agriculture, but it wouldn't render the need for managing those lands and having farmers. It would just be that they might be farming different things.
Thank you very much for your presentation today. Well, we are on time and moving toward the end of our discussions today. We have our panel discussion coming up here. Then it's going to be your chance to tell us what you've learned, what's questions you might be asking yourself as you leave today, and making a comment or two about the presentations that you've heard. But for our panel discussion, we're going to turn that over to Dr. Luca Zullo. Dr. Zullo is AURI's Senior Director of Science and Technology. So Dr. Zullo, the floor is yours for our panel discussion this morning.
Thank you. I'll put back my video on. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, all the speakers. And before starting, asking the audience to provide some input, so we can have a panel discussion among the participants. I wanted to stress a couple of points. That there is a presence in the three topics in these three presentations, which is hydrogen. Hydrogen is important for the bio-based economy, because we need people are thinking about using hydrogen as a fuel, hydrogen as a feedstock, and obviously the challenge is going to be having enough of it and having it economically enough. But hydrogen is also going to be precious. There are things that absolutely need to be done with hydrogen. We need hydrogen to do green ammonia. The production of ammonia accounts for almost 1.5 to 2% of the global greenhouse gas emission worldwide, and without ammonia we can make fertilizers. We need hydrogen to make steel. Again, a big component of a big contributor to greenhouse gas emission is the release of CO2 from the coke that currently used in steel making. If we can use hydrogen, we can reduce dramatically the impact of the construction of steel. So in a way, hydrogen is going to be very important, but also we have to scale up this production. It's going to be precious. And obviously hydrogen today is already used to do renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel from vegetable oils with the traditional hydrotreating process. So what intrigued me about this, the work done both by Vertimas and the University of North Dakota, was that in both cases, we can start from a bio feedstock and we can use hydrocarbons without using hydrogen, which I think can be very attractive for ethanol plants if they look at the integration of these processes with ethanol plants, because we can avoid the step not only of capital cost but also of an expensive feedstock. On the other hand, if we have hydrogen and we start deploying hydrogen in distributed facilities like ethanol plants, however, a bit longer term, the technology that Dr. Babson showed us has a potential that to me is extremely exciting, which is do something with the CO2, or even better, not having CO2 at all, but optimizing the carbon intensity. So I think, again, I would like the audience to think about this technology in this context. Is also a way to, they integrate very well with the hydrogen, with the concept of the hydrogen economy, but also we have to be rational and parsimonious in using renewable hydrogen, for which we have to create a completely new infrastructure. And having said that, I would like to immediately ask a couple of questions. And first, I have a question for John Hannan with Vertimas. When Joe, you mentioned that your process is pretty much ready to commercialization. So what volumes you have piloted right now? So you have, obviously, you're working with Tequip, which is a large EPC firm. So what, and I assume that you have piloted, and what scale you are?
Yeah, great question, Luca. Basically 10,000 gallons a year input to our system. This is interesting though, because it sounds small, but what we do is we try to make it as small as possible to, minimize operating costs and capital costs, but it's large enough where Technip can scale up commercially. So, it's an interesting question. Yep.
And Wayne, I have the same question for you. At what level you are? I know that you were ready to commercialize and so on. At what scale you have done the process?
Yeah.
The cracking reactor scale, around 8 gallons an hour. So I don't know if you have to do the math on how much that is, but it would be considered, I think, pilot scale.
Yeah.
The deoxygenation reactors, we're at smaller than that. We're at more like the 500 mils an hour range. So those reactions, I think, still need to be scaled. One of the things I didn't point out in my presentation is that those deoxygenation reaction technologies could work in other applications besides just our own. When you're looking at decarboxylating instead of hydrotreating to get rid of the hydrogen. Another comment about Vertimax technology and others similar to that, whenever you're generating aromatics from these compounds, you will always liberate hydrogen. So you don't need to use hydrogen, you actually make hydrogen. You might need to condition your catalyst with hydrogen to start, but we've done similar reactions. We've also generated 104 octane F-gas. I've got a paper on that, similar to his. And again, the aromatics generate the hydrogen. If you add the hydrogen, you'll get cycloalkanes instead.
Thanks, Wayne. And actually, that is a good segue to my other questions. I mean, we are talking about mostly fuels, but in both cases, we have hinted to the ability to make chemicals, in particular BTXs. Now, aromatics are a very interesting chemical. The renewable industry wants, the chemical industry really would like to have renewable aromatics, or at least low carbon intensity aromatics. I think that has been always the holy grail of the renewable, bio-based chemistry, because there is really no simple way at all to make aromatics by fermentation. On the other hand, I also know that we also know that right now aromatics are kind of shunned, are increasingly shunned they use for fuel, both for environmental reason and because of also the refiners are moving towards cycloalkanes. Actually, aromatics are getting tight in the market. So I would like to, a bit of comment on how you see this market, because obviously it's a bit higher value potentially than fuel, and obviously from a profitability perspective, from an ethanol company owner perspective, can actually be a bit more attractive to enter in this way, and without some of the complexity that you have to enter with in a very large fuel market with a relatively small new production. And so can you some comment on your experience with aromatics and on the BTEX market in particular?
So at UND we have aromatic generating versions of our technology as well. I didn't show them today. One of the reasons is that the aromatics market, the BTEX market in particular, is still very challenging economically. So I think the margin from ethanol to benzene and toluene is pretty small right now. But as those markets tighten, of course, those values will go up, and there may be more room for technologies like Vertimass. As I said, we've done similar in ours as well, starting from a different point. And one of the questions that I had for John was that when we were aromatizing lipids, we ended up with having trouble overcoming the coking issue on the catalyst. Have you been able to solve that problem by starting with ethanol?
Yeah, we pretty much, we depends how roughly we run the catalyst, but basically if you run it for 2 days or so, we need to decoke.
Yeah, that's what we found too. And of course, the
Yep.
problem there is now you lose that carbon. So I think for aromatics, that's still going to be a problem into the future.
Yeah, but the carbon you lose is small. It's probably on the order of less than 1%. It's
Sure,
small.
I understand. Yeah.
Yep.
No, I'm excited to see somebody going that pathway, which we kind of hit a kind of a roadblock because of it, especially moving away from aromatics and fuels. But it is the platform for most of the polymers in the world. So we're going to need BTEX for a long time.
Yeah. Yep.
Luca, can I interrupt with a
Sure.
question that we didn't get to earlier? And
Yeah, absolutely.
since we have John's attention here, there was a
Yep.
question when you presented, John, that was talking about what sites or plants are you implementing your technology in or on? And is it ongoing? Is it already ongoing, or is it in the near future? And then there was it says zeolite catalysts and a question mark. So maybe you can.
Yeah, we try not to say much at all, but yeah, no, it's very close. A tremendous amount of interest, I would say, from the ethanol producers with respect to trying to diversify. So yeah, we can't say right now, but it's very, very close. Yep. You might hear some news in the next week or two.
So I'll tell you about zeolite catalysts so that John doesn't have to worry about his proprietary stuff. There's engineered silica alumina materials that have a high porosity, and the porosity can be controlled. And then you can go in and you can exchange groups on the silica alumina matrix. You can remove aluminum, you can remove silica, and you can add other things on it as dopants. And depending on what you put on there, you can send the reaction pathways to different places. So we looked at 2 metal doped and undoped zeolite when we were making aromatics from lipids. So I'm suspecting that John's metal dopants are very similar to what we were looking at, which I won't disclose for him. But yeah, they're very common. They're used all over the place. They're really the building blocks of the renewable energy business.
And I have a question for David now, as we wait. And by the way, anyone in the audience that's a question, you can send it to everyone or to Dan, and we'll relate. I have a question for you, David. So obviously, do something with CO2 is probably the holy grail of the fermentation industry. Obviously, the path that you are showing is particularly exciting. It's actually not making CO2 at all. But as the technology evolves, and I know that, and I put you a bit on the spot because I know that is not necessarily your program, but I know that there was a lot of effort done at ARPA-E and DOE on electrofuel, so direct reduction of CO2. Can you comment a bit where those efforts are and how you see that moving to commercialization? And they can be also intended as a kind of a stepping stone towards the technology you have discussed earlier.
Well, I'll be honest. I think that the electrofuels program was really, kind of a precursor to EcoSymbio. When we look back at that program, it was really the one that, kind of changed the paradigm, began to, indicate to people that direct CO2 utilization is the future. Some of the challenges I think with EcoSymbio was that it was, or rather with electrofuels, it may have been just a little bit ahead of its time. And some of the constraints that they put on the pathways, the requirement to kind of leverage bioconversion processes in the interim, and the requirements for finished fuel products may have distracted from some of the more individual breakthroughs that could have occurred from improving CO2 reduction to common intermediate, and those sorts of things. But I will say that program built the technical community that are essentially performers in Ecosym Bio. So there was that value. The arc that ARPA-E views going forward are that, Ecosym Bio is kind of this transition type of technology between where we can leverage biomass as a feedstock and use the energy and the carbon in it to produce renewable carbon products. We can leverage low-cost, low-carbon power to improve the carbon efficiency of the current bioeconomy. And in the future, we really want to develop what we're looking at as reactive carbon capture technologies that will allow us to directly source CO2 from the air, produce valuable intermediates that can then be upgraded, and have end-to-end electrofuel pathways, which will free up the bioeconomy to move more towards, kind of producing higher value products, and also to become a bigger player in the negative emissions economy. So where we see things going is actually more towards completely decoupling fuel synthesis supply chains from the land, and promoting kind of vertically integratable electrofuel pathways for the future.
So I have a question, which I don't know exactly but I'll open to the panel about to comment on green hydrogen, and specifically what we think is the potential as a storage method for access non-dispatchable power, and what the barriers are. So again, I know that all of you have opinions. Probably have been working in this area, so I'll let you give you some. What is your thinking on the role of green hydrogen and using it as a storage medium for renewable energy?
Well, I think if you really want to go to technologies like the one David was mentioning, where you are injecting hydrogen in for fermentation, if you don't start from green hydrogen, then you're not achieving a negative carbon, because currently our best technologies, blue hydrogen, is still shifting methane into hydrogen. It's possible. One intriguing route is to start from renewable methanol rather than ethanol, and try to go from methanol to hydrogen as opposed to directly from methane. And that's a more challenging pathway, but it is possible. But until you can produce green hydrogen economically, I think all of these technologies are going to have a carbon hit that they have to account for that they often don't. You see in the literature.
And it's worthwhile commenting about green hydrogen. Obviously, the greenest hydrogen will be doing from electrolysis, and technology is improving dramatically. Obviously, there is a thermodynamic limit. You still need, even the most efficient electrolyzer will require about 50 kilowatt hour per kilo of hydrogen. So that is pretty much a thermodynamic limit. So obviously you need to have cheap renewable energy, because you have that, if your power costs 9 cents, that becomes pretty hefty. There is a way, I consider that green hydrogen, some people don't, but there is a way to reduce the energy cost from electrical cost by going to high temperature electrolytic electrolysis. But the only way to have that energy cheap is to tie it up to a nuclear reactor. That is actually being done. There is a program that the DOE is funding here to experiment with this type of new technology in terms of electrolysis here in Minnesota with Excel Energy. And they're going to reduce to about 35 kilowatt hour. That's the projection per kilo. But ultimately, the big challenge still remains capital cost. The capital cost, I think, is starting reducing it, and it's going to be a scalability. But today, I mean, even the best project I've seen, realistically, if you account for a return, we talk about $4 a kilo per hydrogen, which is about twice as much as what we get from natural gas at current prices. Now, the reality is that when you start monetizing carbon, we are in the striking distance. So I think we are getting close, but we're not quite there yet. Well, if there are any question from the audience, Dan, you have any question? Oh,
Yes.
Yes.
We do have another question that just came in, and it's for anybody who wants to take it on the group here. Within an ethanol plant, how can your technologies take advantage of the 45Q CCU tax credits? Anyone? No one? All right.
Well, I have another question from that given the urgency to reduce greenhouse gas emission, what you see are the major barriers to deployment of the technologies you have. Obviously, you are a different level of commercialization readiness, technology readiness level, but what do you see the major barriers for your individual technologies for deployment?
I think in our case, our technology's been ready for a while. I think investors are hesitant to put in the kind of funding that's required without the government helping to buy down risk. And if you happen to be a technology that's not on DOE's roadmap, that becomes much more challenging, which unfortunately ours non-catalytic cracking is. But other than that, there's really no barriers for our technology to be deployed today.
John?
No, I was just curious about the the credit. I didn't catch that. Because in Iowa, there is the credit that we have now for BTEX, which is basically 35 cents a gallon or so for BTEX. But I didn't quite catch the question.
The question was, within an ethanol plant, how can your technologies take advantage of the 45Q CCU tax credits?
Okay, I just need definition on like 45Q CC. Yeah.
We're going to, in about 3-4 minutes here, we're going to open it up to let participants ask questions, and maybe we can get this questioner to change the question a little bit so that everybody understands it.
Okay. Yep.
And I have a last question for David, again, about the barrier to commercialization. I realize that obviously RPI works at very early stage, but also I know that part of RPI mission is actually to kind of help closing the gap between early stage and initial commercialization. So under the assumption that from a technical perspective, the program is successful and within 2 years or 3 years, when eventually the program reach conclusion, you have the results you want. How do you see the commercialization happening, and what you see at the time of the way to overcome other barriers that might be the aversion of the financial sector for risk or any other barrier that you can potentially see? And so maybe you can also elaborate a bit more on how RPI looks at fostering this technology getting out, if you want, from the nest.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. RPE, in the beginning of all of its programs from the start, has a technology to market component to it. We have tech to market advisors. We'll be looking for different markets, opportunities, and policy mechanisms that will allow the technologies that come out of the program to be commercialized. And we'll be talking to stakeholders, setting up, stakeholder groups and those sorts of things, so that we can have, private commercialization opportunities for the technologies that come out of the program. Now, some of the technologies, as you were noting, are earlier stage. I think, many of the prospects for the technologies, particularly in our cell-free biocatalysis cohort. We'll probably be looking to transition them to other funding agencies for additional de-risking, like the Bioenergy Technologies Office and others. But some of the proposed, pathways are going to be, probably ready for commercialization in a few years. And, just as part of the strategy of picking the performers in the program to have a different range of, ones so that, some will be commercialized and some will be, further developed.
Well, thank you. And before passing on to Dan, I want to just let you know that there was a message here on the chat that complimenting for the professional presentation and the quality of the material. So thank you again.
I'm going to ask these guys one last question if they want to talk about it. I know that financing is part of the process, and there was a question about green hedge funds. Are they helpful in a financial strategy, bringing these projects forward? Anybody?
Yes. We've found that their money spends just as well as regular hedge funds.
We've had briefings with a number of those funds over the years. So far, none has been successful. So we stay in the valley of death. But if anyone's ready to step up and try to champion this technology that we've been presenting, we'd be happy to talk to you.
Luca, thank you, and thank you, panelists, for a great discussion today. And I concur with some of the comments that have come into the chat box about the value of the presentations that they've seen today. But now it's your chance. We have almost 50 people still on our call today, and what we were going to do with you in Wilmer, we were going to have you at your tables with a staff member from AURI and just have a little more intimate conversation about what you had learned today and about what AURI can learn from your participation today. And we were going to be taking some copious notes and kind of thinking about things in the future and the future of fuel. But so now what I would like you to do is just be brave enough to take yourself off mute if you can, if you're in a quiet enough area, and ask a question, network with somebody that you've seen is in attendance today, make a comment, or let us know a little bit about what you're still wondering about, or what one of your takeaways from today is, and if it's an actionable item or something that just kind of turned a light bulb on for you today. We're going to try and take just a few minutes to see if anybody's brave enough to put themselves out there a little bit. Mike Reese has his hand up. I don't know if I'll be able to see everybody's hand as it goes up. So Mike, I see you have your hand up, one of our external partners with the Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable. So Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Dan. Just a question. I was the person who asked the question about the 45Q. So there are federal tax credits available for carbon capture and sequestration, and also carbon capture and utilization. And I think carbon capture is up, and sequestration is about $85 a ton for 12 years, and carbon capture and utilization about $60 a ton for about 12 years. So that, relating to some of your technologies where you talked about capturing the CO2 from an ethanol plant, from fermentation, are you able to use that to produce the fuel? And I guess the question was, is it eligible under CCU? And it didn't sound like anyone was aware of CCU. So perhaps you could just get into a little bit more of how your processes work on capturing CO2 from an ethanol plant, and what types of fuels you can make from that process. Maybe it's more for John to answer.
Yeah, no, from our perspective, CO2 from the fermentation to make methanol to hydrocarbon products is, what we're after, for sure. So that's kind of a technology that we've just developed on the laboratory scale. But yeah, that's really it. But one question I had was with respect to Minnesota. You guys, are you guys offering any incentives? I know you kind of have a BTEX incentive, but it'd be interesting to know any more detail there.
Mike, do you want to take that, or do you
Well,
want?
there is a green, basically a biochemical incentive available, but I think it's oversubscribed at this point. And perhaps someone from me or I can elaborate more on that.
Yeah.
I believe it's 6 cents a pound.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to put Rod Larkins on the spot. I see he's on the call today, and he's been at many renewable energy roundtables. And maybe I'll just ask Rod for some brief comments about what he's gleaned today.
Well, first of all, I want to echo the comments made earlier about the quality and the content of the presentation is very interesting, and I'm sure that I'll be following up with all of you individually. But I had one question for John, if I may, Dan.
Yep.
And John, your technology is a bolt-on approach, right? You want to add this capability to an existing ethanol plant, and I just wondered what the staffing requirements are going to be if you in fact bolt on this kind of capability. One, what type of employee are you going to be needing for that facility, and how many are you going to be having? Is staffing going to be an issue?
No, I mean, that's a good question. And what we look at is like, all right, so if you take all the ethanol, from the beer column, because we like it being a 40-50% slash, water mix into our catalyst. Any associated labor that you have with the rectification or molecular sieves, we think will be associated with our process. So I think the labor requirements are going to be very minimal, and it's going to be all automatic at the end of the day as well. So yeah, so I don't think the labor is going to be an intensive thing.
So you won't need a couple of full-time engineers on staff to manage the process, that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Rod. Daryl, I see you have your hand up, so the floor is yours.
Oh, hi. Good morning, afternoon, wherever the time zone is. I really just want to thank y'all for this excellent presentation. And with presentations and data like this, even with the numbers attached, what is the barrier to financing other than oil and gas? I'm not understanding why the financing is not kind of running to this.
Well, I can tell you what I've run into, and that is that, most hedge funds are looking for like a 2-year return, but these technologies, you just can't do them in 2 years. It's going to take a little longer to get them into the market, right? I mean, I'm figuring probably to get a first commercial plant from our technology is probably 4 years. Well, that just drops out all kinds of investors just right away. So I think that's the biggest barrier, is the amount of time required to get those returns. That's what they've told me.
Okay, and what is your name, sir? I'm driving right.
I'm sorry, this is Wayne Siemas.
Okay, Wayne. Yeah, my name is Daryl. I'm down in Texas. I work all over the world until COVID hit. Now I'm just a field engineer here in the U.S., but I will reach out to you on the back channel. I think I have a way forward for quick certification with engine manufacturer.
Okay.
And I want to thank you guys again. And on that financing, I'll reach out to you on that. I have some stuff I've been working on the hemp side, and there's money out there. It's very timid, but there's some available, but I will definitely reach out to you personally. Thank you guys so much.
Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thanks, Daryl, for the question and for the offer to reach out as well. That's what the Renewable Energy Roundtable is all about, is developing new networks and new sources of information and hopefully in this case some financing as well. Anybody else want to ask a quick question? Otherwise, we will bring this part of the program to a close, and feel free to just shout it out. If you don't want to raise your hand, take yourself off mute. You can, I'm not seeing anybody run to the batting cage here. So I want to thank our panelists again for their participation in today's program. And we have one more speaker that we want to have you stick around for. And we're looking forward to hearing from her as well. And that is Nina Axelson. She is the founder of Grid Catalyst. Grid Catalyst was founded in 2021, and Nina is an industry leader with nearly 20 years of experience in energy and sustainability. She led her previous organizations with innovative programming and a focus on integrating environmental and financial results. She is leveraging her background in business development, corporate social responsibility, and renewable energy deployment to lead the Grid Catalyst cohort. She previously served on the board of the International District Energy Association, where she led the development of the industry associations for the advancement and empowerment of women in this field. Please welcome Nina Axelson.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. What a lovely welcome, and actually kind of a perfect conversation you all were having to lead into our discussion today. I appreciate the bio as a bit of background about myself, but I do just want to share, because I think to this organization and maybe to today's listeners, of my years in the energy industry, a lot of those were within my work with District Energy St. Paul, which some of you may know as a woody biomass facility in downtown St. Paul, with a cogeneration for heating service to the downtown buildings there. So I spent a lot of years working on biomass issues, biomass funding, and just really resonates with me as folks are talking about alternatives and these incredible benefits that can come from various decarbonization strategies related to biofuels, and just the pain points that can come with development timelines and patient capital. And so hopefully we are seeing change in that in the future. I think there is a lot more interest in this space. I think we're seeing a lot more variety and a lot more diverse interest in the types of capital and types of projects folks are looking for. So if I don't talk about it specifically in my short presentation today, I'm happy to entertain some of those conversations offline with folks today. So again, thanks to the organization for having me part of the roundtable today. As noted, we were founded in 2021, so we are the new guys on the block. My experience with energy over the last almost 2 decades was really exciting, and I love having a home-based company in Minnesota. And you see so much opportunity and you see so much emerging technology coming out these days. But again, I spent a lot of time on projects that got almost to the finish line and really couldn't get implemented because you had someone in the partnership, someone who was responsible for implementation, who just couldn't get their head around being an early adopter, was uncomfortable with using a technology that was new to them. And we just ran into some of those, again, same pain points around funding, around adoption. And for me, I was just so excited about all the things that are happening that I wanted to see if, by starting some work with our partner, Clean Energy Economy Minnesota, we could change the way that a lot of this technology was making it into the marketplace. So what kind of partnerships, what kind of financing, what kind of work could we do with those technology adopters to get them to come to the table actually with us in collaboration? And that's really the driving force behind starting Grid Catalyst. So we are primarily an accelerator program, and I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that. working with emerging startups, working in mostly clean energy, although we are looking at other climate applications. And we are a program of Clean Energy Economy Minnesota. If you aren't familiar with them, they're a tremendous organization that has worked to advocate and promote and advance clean energy businesses throughout Minnesota. And one of the reasons I love working with them is because they're really working small and large, urban and rural, and work absolutely across the landscape of clean energy business here. And I think they've done tremendous work in their 5 years as an organization. So next slide, please. So the accelerator world, there's a lot of activity in what we consider an accelerator or incubator. All of these are really working at some point in the spectrum between here's an idea, and we're going to go do the research to bring that idea to market, as you've been hearing about today from folks at various points in that development. And usually you'll see incubator programs working very early stage when an idea is still in the lab, still in research and development. And usually when they start to move into an accelerator program, it's when an idea has become a bit more tangible. There's a prototype, there's a product, there's a business. That's where accelerators step in. And I heard it earlier again, the commercialization valley of death being such a key pinch point for businesses that are looking to leap from those big ideas and all the work they've done to advance those ideas to actually getting into the marketplace and securing customers and getting that next stage financing that they need. So as you'll note on the map here, there's a lot of activity in clean energy for accelerators, but you can also see there's quite a bit of a gap up in the Midwest. We're very fortunate to have Clean Energy Trust in Chicago that actually works across 22 states. So they do have a Midwest presence, but we were missing somebody and an organization and a platform that could really advocate for the business environment, the types of, again, applications of different technologies, and recognizing that once you're up in these northern climates, the way things work, the needs of the technology to get through our harsher winters and our specific climate needs are different. So it's another reason that Grid Catalyst was started, was to try and fill in that geographic gap, but also the climate gap for dealing with northern climates. Next slide, please. So accelerator models all are built a little bit differently. There are quite a few that are publicly funded. They're either through their state funding. Launch Alaska is a really great example up in Anchorage, and they actually are funded by the Navy and the Department of Energy. But a lot of these programs are in partnership with the public higher ed institutions in their state and their state government. But I bring these statistics to bear because I think that it's important to look at what the investment brings back to that local economy. So when you are able to bring in an influx of startup cash, bring in some early capital, find some of those angel investors for early stage development. So you have 7 million here from Virtue Lab in Oregon, and then you're bringing in 157 million in follow-on funding. So that's a pretty great return on investment if we're using those terms of what they're able to do. And these are actually outdated figures. I think they're about 2 years old. So I know that that program has continued to see a lot of success, and we're hoping that when we build this in Minnesota, we see some similar results. Next slide, please. So we have 3 components of our platform. Mostly I'm going to talk about our accelerator program today, but I also just want to make note that we are looking at this as a holistic venture. So if we want to see successful opportunities for innovators and entrepreneurs and business startup in Minnesota and the Midwest, we really have to think about how we attract the next generation of founders and innovators. What kind of resources do they need? What kind of mentorship and financing? What's their pathway to commercialization, and how can we help them with that? And again, I think as a lot of folks in this meeting recognize, it's really different for those of us working in energy than in other categories. The needs of those businesses and the patient capital and the expertise is really going to be different. And so we're really trying to build a whole set of tools and partnerships that really can be customized to not just our region, but to this sector. Next slide, please. So the accelerator program is actually in the final stage of review for our first cohort. So we spent the fall recruiting for startups. They had to be late stage. So we were looking for folks who already had an incorporated business, had a working prototype, and were ready to really enter the market with a commercial customer or whatever their commercial application would be. So recognizing that as the years go on, we'll look to support more early stage ventures, but knowing that a lot of these late stage businesses are ready to go, and the only thing that they are missing is a demonstration partner that can really show what they're capable of, show what they've been doing in the lab in a real world application. And we wanted to be able to cross that hurdle with our partners. And so we did focus on late stage here. So when folks are selected, they'll go into a 9-month program with us, but the majority of this program is less about training and business acumen that you might get in another accelerator. It is really focused on demonstration, and I'll talk about that in the next slide here. And we're in the final round of review here in December, and I'm really excited that we will announce the winners and selected businesses in our cohort in early 2022. Next slide, please. So a key component of this program for us is building out the demonstration partners. So in this list here, this is our innovators network, and Launch Minnesota and Clean Energy Resource Teams, two very wonderful organizations we're working with. They're not actually going to be demonstration hosts. They're here to help connect us to communities and businesses that want to be in this work with us. So all the other ones represented here are part of this demonstration network. So we are going to matchmake our startups with the folks on this list. So we wanted to have a sampling of utility and business, local government, and higher education, because we wanted to offer different types of real world playgrounds or testing spaces for the technologies that we're going to be working with. So what's exciting about this is we also have all different types of technology applications in our final. So of the 6 that made it to the final, there's not a single repeated technology type. So we'll be looking at, does that one fit with a project with 3M? Does it fit with a project with Connexus Energy? So if there is a match made there, they will go forward and do a demonstration project together in 2022. And we will help facilitate the planning, the financing, the budget, the regulatory and permitting hurdles that come with these types of projects. And that's our job as the accelerator program, to support them as they go through implementation in 2022. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that there's a lot of diversity in the technology categories that we're looking at here. This is just a sample of some of the technologies we were hoping to recruit into the program. And we're looking for that sweet spot for technologies that we knew would be really applicable in a northern climate demonstration project, and what we need in our northern climate to be successful in the energy transition. Also, looking at categories that, again, going back to the last conversation, may not be getting some of the same financing and federal investment or other attention that some other categories are getting. So we know utility scale batteries are getting a lot of federal and private investment. Excuse me. But what's really interesting is in the small scale battery space, there are both large and small players that have come to compete, and we haven't seen that kind of competition and emerging innovator space in energy in the same way previously. So it's really exciting to see a lot more activity where you are having different startups with different value propositions, sometimes in these same categories. We also recognize that a lot of attention gets given to a lot of the same categories nationally and globally, whether that's solar and wind and battery storage, but recognizing that there are thousands of widgets that are, we'll say, below the waterline that we need to make the grid adaptable to the next set of innovation that's coming through, the next types of fuels, dealing with all the things related to carbon capture, that there's a lot of big ideas and big concepts out there, but we need a lot of small invention to make all those things work. Next slide, please. I want to note our equity and access program. We just announced this yesterday. I can just, speak to being a woman in the energy industry. It's really exciting to see so many more people interested in being in the energy field and working on climate. So I think we're going to see a lot more interest, and it's up to us to look at how do we support the innovators and the inventors and the folks that are going to make all these next big projects come together. So we're working with the Center for Economic Inclusion to look at how we can support diverse founders who are new to the space or looking at careers in this category. Next slide, please. So the Energy Innovation Hub is the last part of our platform here I want to mention, because I'm really hopeful that one of the things that can come out of this call are more people who are interested in doing some of this work with us. We really want to be able to see in 2 to 3 years that people can look to Minnesota and the Midwest and say, there is so much exciting stuff happening there. If I'm a startup, if I'm an entrepreneur, if I am an energy innovator, that's where I want to go. And I can be supported and surrounded with peers and financial partners and mentors and opportunity. And that has to start by building out partnerships from the very beginning. So we already have several of those in place with our Innovators Network, and of course, working with the great network with Clean Energy Economy Minnesota. But what we want to do is really build out this hub as a one-stop shop so that when you need to navigate the different programs and opportunities that are out there, we can help with that. We're not trying to replace all the really great programming that happens with other organizations. We just want to make it a little easier for people to find their way. We feel like that's our responsibility in this work. And then that's how we really build a high quality reputation in this space. Next slide, please. So when we look at measures of success, we're looking across several categories. I mentioned this already. I would love to think of Minnesota and the Midwest as a go-to market for clean energy development. I think we tend to think of a lot of this happening on the coast, but I think AURI and the presenters today continue to show that there are things happening all across the country and in a lot of communities that have historically been overlooked. And I think that we really want to show off the innovation and capabilities that we have here and really make that a more national and global reputation, especially as we piece together, there's already a lot of momentum in the clean energy world here. We're doing so many things right. And what are the last couple pieces that have to come together to really elevate that reputation? And then I've talked about a lot of these other things. How do we attract the next generation of talent? How do we make sure we have a culture of innovation? How do we make sure that when people have fantastic ideas and a good business plan, that we don't make them languish with that for years on end, waiting to get the right financial partner? And that we understand that patient capital is needed for some of those projects that take longer to get to market, but are totally worth the investment when we get there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of things that align across the other economic, climate, and energy goals that we're seeing for the region, and really excited to see how Grid Catalyst can continue to contribute to all of those. With that, I think I'll wrap up and take any questions.
All right, thank you, Nina. Great story, I guess. Great to see the work that you're involved with right now. And a question just about which piece are you the most excited about? I mean, what really excites you about this whole project?
Well, I have to confess that I'm a nerd at heart, and so I love seeing all the new technology. I think it's really great to see the innovations that people are coming up with, the problems they're trying to solve. And again, I maybe it's that underdog piece of, I think we get really overlooked. But there's so much happening here, and being able to actually daylight that. So I'm telling my story today, but I want to tell the stories of the businesses so they get the accolades for the hard work that they're doing, that they really get the support they need. And the idea of thinking of these projects being commercialized and these businesses getting scaled up in the next couple of years, that gets me really excited.
And we do kind of need to have a chip on our shoulder here in Minnesota, don't we? Or shine the light on us more often or something. I'm not sure what the answer is, but you know, you put up the energy accelerator map, and there is a huge gap in the upper Midwest. Why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, how much time do you have? So I think that there's obviously been a lot of research and development investment in a lot of the coastal higher ed institutions, especially in Massachusetts. There's been a lot of that investment in entrepreneurial pathways. Those economies have just really built that up over years and years. And what I'm really proud of is that Minnesota is working, it feels like overtime, to catch up in a lot of those spaces. There is a really great startup and entrepreneurial environment in a lot of these places that just, again, hasn't caught the same attention because it doesn't have the same investment partners. It doesn't have some of the same access to capital that some of those other places do. So I think there's always going to be a lot of big investment on the coast, and we just have to acknowledge that and then not be that, right? We get to be our own version of success, which is why I think this idea of how do we create an energy innovation hub that gives a pathway that's different than you might get in those other places. Maybe it's because we create more agricultural based solutions, or we are looking at things that are really what our solutions are needed for our northern states. We get to be our own version of success in that way. But I think there are just a lot of things historically that have put a lot of investment and momentum into the coasts. And we're just going to forge our own path here. Well,
thanks so much for being here today, Nina, and good luck to Grid Catalyst.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you having me. And again, my looking for partners in this work and collaborators. So please don't hesitate to reach out and start a conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Nina.
Thanks. Have a great day.
And with that, I'm going to ask Luca to come back and join us for just a bit as we get ready to close up shop here. Before I do that, I do want to point out, though, that Paul Huguenin with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture did put in our portal, our chat portal, a link. There was a question about Minnesota's incentives, and there's some information in there that those of you who are wondering about Minnesota incentives for the programs, he put a link in there, and I think it's Steve who is running that program. So all kinds of contact information in the chat portal if you want to capture that. Luca, I know there was a couple of things you wanted to say before I have my final closing today. So I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Yeah, thank you thank you, Dan. And well, I want first to thank all our speakers. I think it was a very engaging conversation. And I think from the comment we get to the public, this was very, very much appreciated. As I said, to me, what the main lesson that I take out of this, apart of the specifics of these of the technology we have learned today, is that the industries like the ethanol industry are far from obsolete. They're just at the beginning of the revolution, and they're going to be at the center of this revolution that we're trying to foster, moving away from fossil fuel in a way that maybe was not what as we intended at the beginning, but definitely those assets we're putting in the ground are going to be where these will happen. And with this, I thank the speakers and I thank all the audience. And as I said, you have our email addresses. Feel free to reach out both to us, the URI, and to the speakers for any further question or follow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. And again, thank you to everyone who participated today. And again, as Jen mentioned a couple of hours ago, thank you for your nimbleness and your ability to pivot when we had to change some of our presentations. A reminder now that details of today's presentations will be made available, and we will be emailing you a link so that you can access them. You will also be emailed a survey on today's event, and we do appreciate that you complete those and get them back to us to better inform us on changes to our next Renewable Energy Roundtable program. And with that, I just want to thank you for being a part of the Minnesota Renewable Energy Roundtable.